Well, hey there. How you doing? This is the third part of Vienna Ensemble Pro, kind of a mini series, and it just seemed to make more sense to me to group all these together, spread them out a little bit, and then the next episode will be solely on Cubase and my template. So since this is part 3, we did part 1, one of my computers, which is basically woodwinds, brass, and then drums and percussion. The next one, part 2, we did strings and synthesizers, which is another one of my slave computers. And today we're going to do part 3, which is how it all routes into Cubase. I'm going to show you routing and my busing and things like that. I think maybe I'll do an example with some drums because it's kind of easy to follow along with. But this isn't going to be the main Cubase template tutorial. This is just how VEPro is flowing through Cubase. And ideally, you watch all of these in succession from 2, 3, 4, and then 5, which will be the Cubase template. And that way, we're logically progressing through everything, and you get a better idea of how it works, and you're not stuck in the middle of thousands of tracks of Cubase with me on episode 5. You totally understand how it's working. So, before we get too much into it, I took some notes as promised and just want to share the specs on the computers. And like I mentioned before, they are 2.5 or 3 years old now, but they're still super fast. So my main machine, I had to look all this up, is an E5 Xenon 2.6 gigahertz 24 core. And it's a server. It's not a regular computer. And I'm not a huge tech person, but from what I understand, the guys at Vision DAW basically explained that it's just a really big, beefy computer. And we'll do a machine room tour in a future episode, and you can see they're 3-space rack-mounted machines, and they just have you can put 8 cards in the back of them. They've got slots for 12 different SSD cards on the front. You can pop them out and pop them back in. Just built for speed and performance. That's my main computer is the server. The slaves, I have 2 PC slaves. Those are i7 16-core 3 gigahertz machines. And physically, they're built just like the server main computer. They look more or less the same. The chassis is a little smaller, but they've got all the slots. They've got all the SSD things on the front. Just really well-made computers. I can't recommend Vision DAW enough. I discovered them, by the way, from my friend Lauren Balfe, who was turning me onto Cubase at the time, also recommended Vision DAW because that's what everybody at Remote Control, Hans Zimmer's place, uses. And I was asking a lot of questions that the guys at Vision DAW would say, you know what? That's a good question. Let me ask. I don't know the name of the tech guy at Remote Control, but they're buddies because basically they build stuff to spec for the Remote Control folks all the time. So I was getting a lot of my networking and video extending kinds of questions answered basically by the main guy that hooks them all up at Remote Control. And I figured their situation's a little bigger than mine, so they probably know the best way to make all this work. My router, I used to use just a standard Netgear 8-port switch, and it's the one that's like a 10/100/1000 1 megabit per second 8-port switch. It's called a gigabit switch basically, and that was the GS608 version 3. I don't know if that really means anything, but I bet if you Google Netgear gigabit switch or something, it'll pop up, and that works fine. I was using that for a long time before I got these machines. I think it's $40 or something like that. The new switch that I have is actually a 10 gigabit Ethernet switch. And this came from the folks at Vision DAW as well. So instead of 1 gigabit path, it's 10 gigabits. So it's literally 10 times as fast. And you need to have a special adapter in your computer in order to run it, because most computers come standard with a gigabit Ethernet port. So I've got a card in all 3 slaves, as well as a external Thunderbolt converter for my Mac that converts the computer's output all to 10 gigabits, and they stream back and forth and talk that way. That's also a Netgear switch. It's a single rack mount unit that's a ProSafe. Yeah, there's all these numbers. I'm going to have this listed in the comments at the bottom the description of the video so you can look it up if you want to, but essentially it's a 10 gigabit Ethernet switch with 8 ports on it. And for the Mac, I had to get a Sonnet Twin 10 gigabit Thunderbolt adapter because everything on the little trash can is Thunderbolt only when it comes out, which is one of the reasons I ended up switching. So I had to go Thunderbolt out into this Sonnet Twin converter that went 10 gigabits out and then into the switch. So all that being said, let's do something slightly more interesting now. So here's how everything is set up. This is my main template. And like I said, I will open all these folders and go into all of this stuff in greater detail later. For the sake of, let's see here. If I go back here, and then, no, if I go here, I'm trying to memorize my key switches. Over here, right here, see that little window? Those are my VST instruments that are loaded into this session. And Cubase defaults to having this little window over here. Usually I have it hidden. And I'm doing this because literally this part of the screen you can't see in the video because I have those super curvy widescreen Samsung monitors. And I figured it'd be better to show 2/3 of the screen and get the full video than have my screen, you know, here's the computer and have my screen be that wide. So you can get a better close-up view. But the idea is, down here in the instrument channels, these are my VEPro instances. And I have them over on the right side of the screen as rack instruments. And there are 2 different ways you can add an instrument into Kontakt, either as a track instrument or a rack instrument, and it's not the most straightforward, but essentially if you think about it, a track instrument is a single track. So if you load Kontakt as a track instrument, it's got a MIDI channel built into it. You can see it says Kontakt. You load your one instrument into Kontakt. If you want another instrument, you load another Kontakt track instrument. So it's basically like one sound per VST. And that's totally fine if, for example, I have a piano and that's just a track instrument because I don't need multiple outs or multiple sounds or anything like that. Everything else is a rack instrument, and I think of it as in instruments in a rack where they have lots of outputs and lots of inputs, and you can move around and you can plug them into a patch bay or something like that. So that's why these are rack instruments, because I need to be able to use the multiple outs associated with them. And if I click on my reveal button over here, they all pop up. The only one you can't really see off to the right, this is the loops on my Mac, and I figured it's probably okay if you can't see that. Let's disconnect this. So this is what VEPro looks like if it's not connected and you open up a session. Now ideally, you already have the things that you're going to have permanently connected that are not going to be per project, like my synthesizers. They're already connected and they will connect automatically when you open up the session. Even the per project things will also connect automatically, but they'll do a new, what's it called? A new project, I think, in VEPro. But my synthesizers, when I connect, it makes a new tab in VEPro and it loads up the synthesizers that are associated with that particular project. So as you can see right here, I've got my slaves. Let me switch. I'm using, what's it called? It's just the generic, right here, remote desktop connection. So I've got a shortcut because this guy is at number 7 on the toolbar down here. Basically, Command 7 pops it up. And if I hit it once, it goes to my first slave. If I hit it the second time, it goes to my second slave. And you can see down here at the bottom how it chooses between the two. So I know always, if I'm in Cubase and I want to go to slave number 1, which has my strings, I just hit Command 7 and it pops it up automatically. And it's literally running through the same Ethernet connection that I'm using the samples. So it's, I can't even tell that it's remote. It feels like it's local to me. If I hit Command and tap 7 twice, then it pulls up my second one. And as I mentioned before, the drums I actually don't need to look at over here because I'm never really adding or changing anything. And if I do need to add or change anything, all I really do is just go into the machine room where there's a local computer screen, mouse, and keyboard, and I add it there and save it. So with VEPro, you can see here, there's my Mac with the loops. Here's JGM01, which is this guy right here, strings 1 and strings 2. We've got strings 1 and strings 2. And here's JGM02, winds 1, 2, and drums, as you can see right here, winds 1, 2, and drums. Now what's really cool about this is if you're on the same network and you plug these Ethernet cables into this switch, it just pops up magically. And it connects once you tell it where you want it to connect. So for example, I know right here, Winds 01, it's pretty straightforward. I want to match that to Winds 01. Now, if you watch over here at Winds 02, this is going to disappear because I'm connecting. It pings the network, it bounces back, it connects, and Winds 02 just disappeared as a potential connection in all the other windows. So we're going to do the same thing here. Winds 02, Winds 02. Drums, drums. Now there's a buffer setting here. This is in addition to whatever your buffer setting is within your DAW. And I'm not sure why. I think maybe it's because I usually run at 256 buffer setting on my main computer. There's something about VEPro that it'll just sit and kind of like spike the performance meter even though nothing's going on. And I realized once I set the VEPro plugin to a single buffer, which what it does is it doubles it. So instead of 256, those are set to 512. All the spiking went away. And I'm not sure why. I know it's not computer hardware or RAM related because the computers are sitting at like 10% processing power and there's still plenty of RAM. I just think it's probably extra memory maybe that Vienna Ensemble needs. So I would say, first of all, if you're running a computer and you're getting some glitches and spikes and things with VEPro, look at your performance meter, and if it's jumping even when you're not playing anything, if you're just sitting idle and you see the meter kind of jumping around, try adding a buffer or two on your plugin specifically. And what's really nice is you can do this per instance. I love saying instance apparently, but it just seems like a straightforward term. So I've got one buffer set for everything except the drum loops. I have 4 buffers, but that's another story. We'll get into that later. So here's strings 01, strings 02. I'm going to connect to loops in a minute. Now you notice there's no synth because I'm on synth 01 right here. Now the reason that there is no synth is because I don't have this lock button engaged. The preserve icon is not turned on for my synthesizer tab that has all my synth sounds. Now the reason for this is really easy. I mean, a big thing that people love to do is they use orchestra sounds and they've got, you know, maybe a certain EQ and there's certain violins they like or whatever. But when it comes to synthesizer sounds, they're very project specific. And I'm going to pull up a different patch and I'm going to tweak it and I'm going to have different effects and all this kind of stuff going on with the synthesizer sounds. So I have those unpreserved, which doesn't mean that you lose them. It just means that the slave computers purge them once you close the project. So what I'm going to do is go back to Cubase, and because it's not preserved, there's not an, you can't see it here, but I know that I put it on JGM01 because that's my first machine. That's where I have all of my synthesizer sounds and Kontakt things ready to go. JGM02 doesn't have any of them because why would I put them there? I'm not using them. So as soon as I hit new here, I'm going to switch, and you can see it's already added a tab and it's loading all of the synthesizer channels that I have. And the beauty of this is everything that you're seeing that's loading, all the data, all the patch data, even if you just have a initialized patch and you don't actually save it within the synth program itself, it's remembering everything, and it will pull up, like if this is just a straight up thing, if I tweaked something and did this and switched this out and changed this around, and this was my first synthesizer patch that I just love to use in this new piece, when I close my session, this is going to disappear. Here, we'll make it super easy. If I go to a preset, oh, Matt, I love you so much. So sunset song. Now when I'm back here, when I hit save, it's saving this synth instance. It's pinging the computer and then coming back, and this plugin is saving the fact that I have sunset sound as a preset right here. And when I close it out, it'll disappear, but it will remember it. So any tweaks that you make, whenever you hit save in Cubase, anything that is not preserved is going to be saved as well. And what I love is when you close it out, it disappears. And you will not have to connect to it the way I did in this window. It will connect automatically and open up on the slave computer automatically and remember everything that you've done. And for me, that's the best of both worlds. So I've got all my RAM heavy stuff for orchestra sitting in the computers waiting to go, and then it automatically remembers and opens up all my synth stuff. And it obviously doesn't have to just be synth stuff. It can be whatever you want. It can be orchestra stuff. Maybe there's certain things you don't have a big enough template to warrant preserving too many things, and it only takes 34, 50, 60 seconds to load. My stuff is it's a little different. The slaves, when I start them up in the morning, I have them set to automatically open VEPro, and it takes them about 8 to 10 minutes to load everything into RAM. And then when I open my Cubase session, because there's so many tracks there, it takes about another 5 minutes for the Cubase session to open. So you're looking at 13, probably 15 minutes total, and if that stuff wasn't preserved, it also takes about 4 minutes to dump everything. So now you're getting close to 20 minutes for me to close one session, wait for everything to dump, open another session, wait for everything to load back in, and that's just not time responsibility, is it? This way, under 5 minutes, I can close out one session, open up another one, and I'm totally good to go. So routing-wise, I thought maybe the easiest thing would be to just take a look at some drums. And so this is the Hans Zimmer drums, just the low drums, so just this single instance. And I love it because you can see the meters over here of what's playing. Does it show 2 meters? Come on. It's right there. Oh, geez. Nope, it doesn't move. Okay, well. So Hans Zimmer drums. You can see them there. You can see them here. If I pull up the outputs, I've got them all going out of their individual outputs. And this was just through the batch function at the top here that I talked about in a previous tutorial. So that goes straight to specific outputs. And these are already routed back into Cubase. If I go to Cubase, you can see these guys. These are the 4 buses for these 4 drums. And down here, these are the, 8 buses for these drums. So when I'm playing MIDI, this is actually MIDI information, and this is audio information. And let me stop tapping the keyboard and making myself crazy and just do something real quick. All right, so now we've got a little thing that we're gonna return to start position on stop for everything, so I don't need to keep tapping. So now the way this routes is I have it coming in drum returns. These are literally the inputs from VEPro, just straight up. Now I have some panning. You can see different drums are panned different ways. That's actually within Kontakt, because I never really wanted to change it. But if I did want to change it, all I would have to do is adjust the panning in VEPro via a CC controller on my keyboard in Cubase. Same way you would adjust a volume or modulation. It's just CC7, and you can adjust it that way. But I have it defaulted panned sort of the way I like, just to give it an ensemble sort of a feel. And then this is my orchestra returns. So these first four are just kind of where my general things come in, straight from VEPro. Sometimes I'll put effects on them, sometimes I won't. Now, interplanetary, interstellar, and intergalactic are the three sets of buses that I have. So when we go to interplanetary, and I scroll over here, where I can see some pictures of drums, taikos, and low drums. So we're already going from, 12 or 14 channels down to 2. And if I went back to drum returns, you would be able to see that the taikos are going out of this bus, taikos, and all the low drums are going out of this bus, low. This is where I have my first plus, so it makes it easy for me to keep up with things. And from there, they're going to drum low 01 and I believe drum low 02. So if we go to interstellar, we can find drum low 01 and drum low 02. And that's just a matter of, the only difference between the first set of buses I just showed and this one is this is where the returns come back. So if I have reverb set either way back here on the initial drum returns, or a lot of times I'll do it here within interplanetary, like this Aphex send for the drums, which is brilliant for drums. It gives it some really nice top end. That's actually in my effects rack, which from here is the next in line. And we can scroll down here and see, there it is, Aphex. And that is coming out here. So the effects returns come back through here. And that's why I kind of have 3 different sets. The drums are fairly straightforward, which is why I thought it might be nice to start with that. So they're there. And then I also have another set of, I believe that's the Fatso. There you go. I'm just a huge fan of UAD. So really nice UAD compressor with tape kind of stuff from Empirical Labs. And then all of that comes out finally to here, which is a lot more simple. And normally, the real trick here is normally this mixing window is down here on my left screen, and it's really, really wide, so I can see almost all the channels, especially in this last busing system. I can see definitely all of the channels. And I've got another mixing board that shows me MIDI information and general output sort of things in the TV that's behind these 2 big screens. So if it feels like it's maybe a little crowded here and there's lots of scrolling going on, it's because normally I have it split across multiple monitors. But this is the last sort of run where everything comes out. And there's the drums all low. So I know if I want to, for some reason, do the taikos separately from all those low drums, which was the original kind of double set of buses, all I have to do when I choose bounce is go down here, and a lot of times I will just hit the plus, but I can do taikos, channel batch, taikos, and drum low. So it's going to bounce those out. Now the only real trick to that is if you choose something that's further back in your processing chain, that means like the Aphex plugin that I had, or maybe a reverb send, wouldn't print. That's why I have multiple kind of versions of the stems. If I choose the second one, I know that's got a reverb return on it, and the I believe the Aphex was in line on those channels, so that will print as well. So it's really a matter of flexibility and sort of having choices, especially when it comes to bouncing stems. Now there's another way we can look at this, I believe, if I go back to drum return and just click on this. So there's this, I love this little show output chain is great. So you can see that we've got tychos here, but when you show the output chain, I can see where it's going from tychos to the HZ. I can't point to it, it covers it up, to the HZ tychos, to drum low again, and then it goes through the 3 buses that I have at the very end of my main stereo out, which normally I'm using for soundtracks because I just so rarely do anything stereo anymore. Whether I'm doing TV, trailers, commercials, games, or film, it always ends up being stems. But that goes EQ, which goes to tape, which goes to compression, which goes to main out. And what's really nice is you can click on these and it'll pull the next one up and you can see what's going on in that channel. And you can also see what we just switched to the wrong thing, but you can see what the source is as well. So if I went back here, and I clicked on drum low, for some reason it's taking me to hits instead. Thanks, Cubase. Let's try that one more time. If I go to tychos, I've got 4 sources here, and it's the 4 tycho channels, and then 2 targets, and I can see where it's going. It's going to drum low, and it's also going to affix, which I know is an effect send because I have an X in front of it. And I know drum low is my secondary bus because I've got 2 pluses here. So a lot of it really comes down to not just being organized, but being able to navigate through the template quickly and figure out what sounds are routing where and how I'm going to use them. Now, something I'll definitely talk about a lot more when I'm going over my main template and not just VEPro workflow is how I use the last bus to figure out what stems I'm going to be exporting. Because a lot of times the view that you just saw, this one right here, this is everything within Intergalactic. And that's not necessarily what I'm going to be bouncing. I was just doing a trailer thing that was basically sound design, effects, and drums. So that means all of these orchestra things up here were obsolete. And what I did was I hid them because I wasn't going to be using them at all. And then there were some other group tracks that I wanted to have that were back along the second line here for Interstellar. They had all the effects that I needed and they had all the routing that I needed, and I didn't need to go to that 3rd set of outputs. So let's just say that it was, you know, loops, and I had some synth effects, and I had some drums. Let's say I had lots of drum stems and a synth bass. And then what I would do is, this is everything that are basically the stems that are coming out. I update that configuration, and now I know when I go to choose what to bounce, I just pull up this last Intergalactic mixing board profile, and I can see all the stems that I need to bounce, and I just correlate this mixing group with this over here. And I can filter it down so I start only with 2 pluses. And whatever this is, this was the last time I bounced something, I'm not exactly sure. But that way it makes it easy for me to, as I'm working, have things routed the appropriate way and then know what my final output for that particular stem will be. And that's why I have a lot of things like percussion 1 through 5 or loops all 1 through 4. They probably won't stay named that way. What I'll end up doing is making them a lot more customized and say, you know, solo drum or bowed metal gong, or for loops it will be the specific, you know, maybe it's high ticky loops or something that helps me figure out on a more granular level what it's going to be. And also importantly, it's going to show up here named that exact same way, which means it will also show up. Let's see if I do that. Oh, it'll auto name for you, and it will name append, like if this was, you know, whatever the episode number is and all that kind of stuff, it would say that, and then it would append this to the end. So it's automatically naming everything, and that goes a long way to keeping things simple and organized. So you bounce out your stems and literally you're finished. You don't have to go back and rename them or worry about classifications or subgroups or anything like that. It's super straightforward, and you've already done all your work. So once you bounce, you're literally finished which is very nice. Now, the one thing that I don't have basically turned on right now is any of my external processing. That's what this little beauty up here is for. So I think with the drums, what did we see? There was a fatso, and there was an affix, and there was probably a little bit of EQ on the very beginning, I think. So we'll turn the effects back on. I don't know if it doesn't bypass the EQ if it's in the channel, if it's a Cubase EQ, but I think I have like a fab filter thing. Back to no plugins. So you can hear there's a little more top end, a little more clarity in the lower mids. It's not an extreme sort of thing. It's one of those kind of stacking a little bit at a time, and a little bit goes a long way as you move down the signal chain. It's another reason it's nice to have so many different buses and kind of stages of how things are going to work. And a little bit here, and a little bit there, and a little bit of top end. And it's a lot easier, at least for me, to think of it in terms of layering the sound that way than it is to have 7 plugins on my drum, bus, and trying to EQ and do compression, and there's 20 or 30 different drum sounds going through that one bus. This way, everything's spread out, and it's just easier for me to make sense of it, really. One last thing that isn't completely relevant, but it's just fun. I can't help myself. I was amazed how powerful these computers really are. So if I go to my drums, let's just look at this guy. Now, these have max voices set at 200, and I believe that that's just the default. And honestly, when you're just that's with everything going, you can see it hits about 150 and you're good to go. But literally, I could sit here and do this. And we got up to 2,400 voices up here. And the computers, I think it just went up to about 28% on the meter for CPU usage. And obviously there's no reason I would be sitting there doing an insane amount of rolls. And the only reason you heard the voices starting to go away is because of the limit here. And honestly, I didn't even know that this was the case until I just pulled it up before recording and was doing a test. But that's really the kind of thing that shows, especially if I went back to Cubase. Can I get my meter? Let me just break everything and do this. So don't pay attention to this looking all wonky. Usually it's full screen. So there's my performance meter, and if I do it again, so that's 2,400 streaming voices from Kontakt, which is probably, maybe an average sort of thing that I would get with the whole orchestra playing and the drums and everything else, but nothing in terms of a real world scenario just for drums. And I'm going to do a separate tutorial that talks about how I do drumming and everything, and another tutorial right after this one, as a matter of fact, that details more of the template itself and the effects I use and what's turned on and what's turned off, what I like to bypass, what my defaults are, and that kind of a thing. This one was just about VEPro signal flow. So I hope it makes sense, and congratulations getting through all 3 videos. And until next time,